blend mode is how you can tell Photoshop the way you want it to interpret the information from one layer to the layer beneath it. So before we get started on this, there's a few terms I want to make you aware of. First, we have channels. So next to Layers panel right here, we have our Channels panel. If it's not open, go to Window, Channels. You can see we have a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. Every image is comprised of these colors, and the way they're blended together makes the final picture. So if you have one of them selected, like if I have just my blue channel selected, this black and white image shows me where my blues are within this blue channel. If I select my green and blues, you can see how they're blended together here. If I have just my greens, it'll go back to a black and white image, and this shows me where my greens are in my picture. And then if I add my reds, we get the actual version with it all put together. So those are channels. I also want to remind you about three terms to describe colors. We have luminance, hue, and saturation. Luminance refers to the brightness or darkness of your color. Hue refers to the tint, so what color you're actually having in your color. And then saturation is just how strong that color is present. So as we go and talk about blend modes, we're going to refer to those terms. So I just want to remind you and make you aware of them. So as we work, we'll have our base layer. We're not going to adjust the blend mode on this layer. This layer named blend above it, we're going to adjust this. So let's turn it on. Right now, by default, it's set to a normal blend mode at 100% opacity. Normal just means that it's not going to show or pick what parts of the image to show. It's just going to show all of it as it is at full opacity. We can bring the opacity down, and now we can see the image below it. Or we could also bring the fill down. Now on a normal layer, fill and opacity do the exact same thing. There are some blend modes where fill will actually affect them differently, and we will explain those as we get to them. So by default, our layer is set to normal. Then we have dissolve. Dissolve won't change until you bring down the opacity, and then it kind of turns into a noise effect on your image below, but the noise is the blended layer, and you can adjust how much of that you see with the opacity. Those are our normal blend modes. Then the next category is darken, and we have 5 options in here. Let's start with darken. Darken will look at both images and show whatever is darker. So on our original picture, we have white here, we have black here. Because everything is darker than white and nothing is darker than black, when we turn it on, you can see that black will stay black, but white will become transparent. You can also see that up here. The black areas, because they're darker, are showing through here, and as we go through this gradient to the white areas, the whites are shown as transparent. So it starts out as black and then becomes clear. And we can see through perfectly clearly by the end of this image. Then we have multiply. This blend mode will multiply together the luminance or brightness values of your two images. It's a lot like darken, except for a little bit stronger of an effect. Then we have color burn. Color burn is a lot like multiply, but it will increase the contrast between your images and show more saturation in the midtones. Color burn is the first of our blend modes that is affected differently by fill. So remember, I can adjust the opacity or fill by clicking on the arrow and dragging it. Or I can click on the word and drag it. That's what I'm going to be doing because it's a lot faster. So when I adjust the opacity of this blended layer, you can see how it changes here. It has the same effect, but it's less visible. When I change the fill, it'll actually change the effect itself. The blend modes that allow you to change the fill are usually the strongest blend modes that create the most crazy looking pictures to start off with. You can always use fill to just bring down the influence of that blend mode a little bit. Our next blending mode is linear burn. Linear burn is a lot like multiply, but darker. And it's a lot like color burn, but it doesn't add saturation to your image. This is another effect that can be adjusted using the fill. As you've probably been able to tell, each of the blend modes in the darken section makes the image darker and doesn't lighten it in any way. Our last blend mode in this section is called darker color. Now, darker color does the same thing as darken, which is show whichever pixel is darker between the two. But let's look up here. In darken, we get a more blended look. In darker color, we can see pixel by pixel which one was darker. And that's the one that's showing through. The reason there's a difference between these blend modes is because darken compares the channels independently. So it'll look at the red channel and say, from my red channel, I'm going to see whichever pixel is darker compared to the red channel on my base layer. Darker color doesn't look at the channels independently and then blend those together. It just looks at the pixels as a whole and chooses whichever ones are darkest to show through. And that's why you can see each individual pixel in this image. Next, we're going to look at our lighten blend modes. We have 5 options here as well, but each of these does the opposite. It will brighten our image. So let's go to lighten. Just like darken, it will look at the pixels in my channels and show through whichever one is lighter. Except it will compare them on a channel by channel basis and then blend the 3 channels together so we have a more blended look in our final image. Our next blend mode is called screen. I like to think of a movie theater using a projector in this example. So with a projector, you can't project darkness onto your screen, right? You can only project light pixels. So when we turn on our screen blend mode, you can see that it projects the pixels onto the base layer, but it can't project darkness, so it only lightens the image. So areas of this image that are lighter, like this completely white here we have 50% gray, and here we have complete black. 50% gray lightens it a little bit. Where there's black, it can't project anything because you can't project darkness, so it's just completely transparent. And where it was white, it projects pure white. Our next blend mode is called color dodge. Color dodge is a lot like screen, except it adds contrast and saturation to your image. That's why we see in the white areas, little areas where there's been contrast added. This is another blend mode where we can use the fill effect to bring down the intensity. Our next blend mode is called linear dodge. Linear dodge is similar to color dodge and screen, but a little bit more intensely brightens the image and it doesn't add saturation. Then our last option within the lighten blend modes is lighter color. So remember how darken and darker color acted differently? They did the same thing, but interpreted either the channels on a channel by channel basis and then blended them together with darken, or looked at the picture as a whole in darker color and just showed whichever pixel was darkest. Lighter color does the same thing as darker color, but it'll show through whichever pixel was brightest. So we can see this area of the image again. We see individual pixels depending on which one is brighter. If you compare lighter color and darker color, you'll see the exact opposite set of pixels between the 2 images.